Hello, I'm Bod the Booker and welcome to our channel. Today, because I love a good pun, and this is a pun that Kieran and I over at KD Books have spoken about, we wanted to do something called Indiecember. And from a quick look on YouTube, it seems like this has been done in the past a couple of years ago, and I'll link to some of those past ones. But how I at least want to interpret this theme slash pun slash whatever is... Over the year, there have been quite a lot of books that have been mounting up on my sort of side pile, some of which you can see here, which we'll be speaking about in a second, particularly from a lot of indie presses. And I keep on putting off reading them because something else comes up, or there's a prize shortlist, or I've suddenly got too many books out from the library, or what have you. And so I've sort of ended up with this quite long, quite big pile here of books, particularly from indie presses, and I really want to read them. And I think also, given the current economic climate and given that we're about to go into the holiday season, it also feels like a good time to just be speaking about some indie presses that are doing some really great stuff, because often, in my experience at least, they've been really at the forefront of creating some excellent work, often championing marginalized voices, often championing much more experimental or innovative fiction, as seen with the recent Goldsmith shortlist, where there are a couple of indie presses on there. And you just sort of get this really fun mix a lot of the time from indie presses of really being able to do incredible things with incredibly meager resources comparatively. And so the huge pile of books that will be in the thumbnail and that I'm going to be quickly showing here, I don't think I'm going to be able to read all of these during December. That would be somewhat impossible, especially given that I, true to form, instead of saying, just taking on the library books that I already had and then making peace with that, I was like, oh, what about this other thing I could request? And so this pile is not getting any smaller. In fact, it is growing daily, and this is a worrying thing. But I want to try and read as many of these as I can during the winter break, and particularly during December, because these are books that I've been putting off all year, and I know that so many of these are going to be ones that are going to be in my favourites of the year as well. And so to this pile thing here, so I'm going to put this down because that's really impractical. But in this pile, it's sort of full of books from so many indie presses that I've read and loved things by before, some which I've never read anything by. But, we've got people like Incandescent in here, with Justin David, who I interviewed at some point this year. We also have some lovely ones from Tilted Axis, who published, for example, Tomb of Sand this year, which went on to win the International Booker. And I've been really meaning to read a fair few more of those, and I've been sort of slowly stockpiling them throughout the year. I think as well, it's not great for any kind of compulsive tendencies, the fact that they have their numbers of their books on the spines, because it sort of meant that as a result I'm like, well, I've read 25 and 26, should I just read 27? And yeah, it's anyway, but also a few other firm favorites are in here. Let me quickly move a couple of these down, and of course you can also get these from the library in many occasions as well. We have Galley Beggar Press, so Paul Sandbridge with My Mind to Me a Kingdom Is, which I have a really strong feeling I'm going to love. A sort of some quite grisly circumstances in the background of this book around the sort of death of a brother, but kind of processing grief through this book, which should be really cool. I'm not going to go through every single one, don't worry, this will otherwise take 14 hours. But 3 Times Rebel, who I'm really excited by, because I read Nuria Bendicho's book Deadlands, I think it was called, which I adored, and thought was really cool and interesting. And they are an indie press that really focuses on their sort of 3 parts of being rebels, essentially. So they publish only women writers. Those women writers are published in translation, and those are translations from minority or minoritized languages. And so you get this really cool sort of, and also this is just really, they just look really pretty. So I'm really excited to be reading some of these. And just, there's a lot. I'll quickly do a bit of a rapid run through of some. So we have some Fitzcarraldo in there because, of course, I mean, they're wonderful, and yeah, I'm going to try and find some space on the side to do this. I'm just going to point out some others that I'm just particularly excited by. We also have Cypher Press, who I really, really love. They're a kind of queer indie publisher. And they this is a sort of set of interviews talking about sex workers, and we also have yeah, this is a book I've been meaning to read all year. I bought it pretty much, I think, as it came out, and then haven't got around to it. So Pretty Teenagers Aftermath, which I think also won the Gordon Byrne Prize, or it won some other literary prize this year, but is essentially this really interesting non-fiction book, it seems, talking about so a Pretty Teenager did a writing workshop in a prison, and one of the people she worked with actually later went on to commit a huge sort of terrorist attack, and so she has this sort of, it's her kind of examining it from kind of the inside of what it, the relationship she had with that person. Then we have a few others, and I'm just quickly trying to find them. These are the last ones I'll talk about, because otherwise I will be here all day. But Weatherglass Books have kind of, I sort of was part of the sort of, they launched this new press, and they have this subscription model, and I've been that awful person of sort of joining and being like, yeah, I'm going to support them, and then having read none of the books so far. So I really want to try and change that, just because I think they seem so interesting, and it's they were brought up, they established themselves on the idea that Blue Flower by Penelope Fitzgerald was a favourite book of theirs, a book I love as well, and that a book like that wouldn't normally get published. So actually, could they be the kinds of publishers who would publish other books like The Blue Flower? And then just a couple of other very quick ones. And then a couple of sort of other queer ones. So a book called Cruising, sort of a non-fiction book looking at the kind of history of it. And then Harsh Cravings, with this very little kind of doily thing, by Polari Press, by Jason Huff, which also just looks really fun and kind of bombastic. So yeah, lots to be getting on with. I'm not really facing any kind of shortage of reading material, evidently, but I also probably do need to slow it down with either buying new books or going to the library. Both of these are good things for the book industry and for authors, but I think personally I've taken on quite a lot of reading this year, as you may have noticed. There's a risk that I will just be this sort of, I'll just be sort of surrounded by books endlessly, which doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world, but that I might actually never really get round to some of the ones that I've been really planning on reading for a while. Anyhow, all of this is to say, please do add a couple of indies from your TBR to your reading in December, if you so fancy, because I think this is a really great time to be shouting about indie authors. It's always a really great time to be shouting about indie authors and presses, but particularly during the winter period, particularly during rising costs, those are often the publishers and authors who struggle most. So yeah, give them a bit of love. Even if you get them from your library or Scribd or BorrowBox or Libby or whatever else, give them a bit of love. Anyway, I've been Bob, talking about some indie books that I really plan on reading this year. I hope you're doing well, and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.